Welcome to the ProfitLed podcast, where we discover proven growth strategies for bootstrapped entrepreneurs from the people who have done it before to help you accelerate your business. The ProfitLed podcast is brought to you by eWebinar, the leading automated webinar platform, which could save you from doing the same webinar over and over again. From sales demos to onboarding to training, eWebinar turns any video into an interactive webinar that you can set on a recurring schedule or make available on demand, which means you can do hundreds of webinars without ever needing to actually be there to host them live. This podcast is a forum for the unsung heroes of SaaS, the founders and others behind bootstrapped startups who are creative and resourceful enough to forge a pathway to success. Here is where they get to share everything they learned along the way, so you can benefit from their experience and find success in your own ventures too.
Welcome to ProfitLed, the podcast for bootstrap entrepreneurs looking to make it happen. My name is Melissa Kwan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of eWebinar and your host. Today's guest is someone I'm particularly excited about because I've been following him on social media for a while. I'm a huge fan of his content around solopreneurship and how to write engaging content to build an audience. He's someone who has inspired me to rethink what I want in my life by being the ultimate example and role model of intentional life design, which is the topic I wanted to dive into with him today. If you followed my journey, you'd know that eWebinar was a product born out of my own motivation to design my life around having more time and freedom to enjoy my life, rather than being stuck in my business doing repetitive live demos and training webinars every day just to keep my business running. After a panic attack at 36, my guest quit his high-paying executive role at a tech company and embarked on a journey to self-employment. I'm stoked for him to share his story today and his quest to inspire more people to take control of their own lives. So here we are today with my special guest, Justin Welsh. Hey, Justin, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Melissa, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
So as you know, I've been asking my guests to bring a drink to the podcast so we can share it together virtually. What'd you bring with you today?
I brought coffee. I'm normally a craft IPA drinker, and I like a good glass of wine or tequila. There's a lot of things, but given the time of the day, I chose coffee.
All right. Well, I'm in Bali right now, and I actually got this turmeric and tamarind soda water. I wanted to get something local just to give it a shot. So I'm going to open it right now for some ASMR magic.
Oh, wow.
All right. Well, let me... All right. Well, cheers.
Cheers to you.
All right. It's interesting. I'm liking it.
Yeah, my coffee is from this morning, so it's not that interesting.
Well, if you're at home, you can join us, by the way, as well, by pouring yourself a drink. So, Justin, let's start with your story. Who are you? What do you do?
Yep, my name is Justin Welsh, and I am currently building a diversified portfolio of one-person businesses. And so I'm a solopreneur. I run a bunch of different businesses on social media. But prior to that, I spent 10 years in technology. So most recently as the VP of sales and then eventually the chief revenue officer at a company called Patient Pop in Los Angeles. And prior to that, as a director of strategic sales and a few other positions at a company in New York called ZocDoc. But much like you talked about in the opener, I worked, from the age of 14 till 36, at summer jobs and then eventually at regular sales jobs and then into the tech field and then as an executive. And that sort of all culminated in this pretty massive burnout in 2018. And that was really the start of what allowed me to begin thinking about how I wanted to redesign my life. And I've done that almost to the extent where that I feel extremely comfortable. I haven't quite, I think it's always a journey of trying to get to the best point possible. But right now, I've spent the last 3 years trying to design my life intentionally. And I do that by running my own businesses and really trying to have life-work balance instead of work-life balance. So that's me.
So when you first quit your job and started your own business, what did you do? Is it the same as what you're doing now, or was it something completely different?
Totally different. So after I had my panic attack, I had my panic attack in December of 18. In January of 19, I told my co-CEOs, I want to step down and leave. And they asked me to stick around for it was supposed to be 7 months. It ended up being 8 months. And I didn't really know what I was going to do, right? Like I didn't really have like a plan for going in business for myself. And so I did what a lot of people do when they leave their company, especially executives, which is I consulted. So I became a traditional SaaS consultant in my niche, which was SMB SaaS in the healthcare vertical. And so I built a website and I was like, all right, I need to let people know that I exist. And so I was like, there's a million different ways to do that. YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, there's a million channels, right? And a good buddy of mine was writing on LinkedIn and he was having some traction. His name was Kevin Dorsey. He worked for me. And I was like, hey, I guess I'll just write about what I do as an executive. What are the things I learn, all that stuff. And so I started writing about that. And over the next 8 months or so, I grew an audience of around 20,000 people. And when I went to launch my own business, I launched a consulting business and I had a full pipeline day one because I had built that audience up. And so that was what I did back then. What I do now is significantly different. And I no longer advise SMB SaaS companies.
And in the article you wrote called Designing an Intentional Life, which is in the show notes of this episode, you mentioned that a year into running your own business, you started to crash again. What did you mean by that? Did something happen?
No, it's more a personality trait of mine, which is like, I like to work. So there's two things. Number one, I like to work. But number two, I don't think burnout comes from overwork. I can work all day for the most part. I think burnout tends to come from when you start to lose control. I know that's true for me at least. And as I got deeper and deeper into my business, I realized that I was making the business way more complex than it needed to be. And because it was so complex, so many tools, so much tech, so many different automations, so many systems, so many things I had to do manually, I ran the risk of burning out again because everything was starting to feel outside of my control. And so the exercise that I went through in part was really about simplification. So how do I simplify my business and simplify my life while still achieving outcomes that I desire? And so that was the beginning of really making sure that I didn't go down that burnout rabbit hole for the second time.
And was that when you landed on the concept of intentional life design?
It wasn't necessarily when I landed on the concept. So I'll use the word studying, but it's probably not the right word. I had been dabbling in just like learning more about that life design. It started the same way a lot of people start, which is learning a little bit about minimalism, right? Trying to get rid of stuff, right? That kind of felt like it was weighing me down. It went from minimalism to, maximizing enjoyment to decreasing things that you don't want to do. And so I was just dabbling and mostly reading a lot of content online about lifestyle design. And so it wasn't when I necessarily discovered it, but it was really the first time that I sat down and put it into practice. And before I even put it into practice, I put it into words. And the words were the article that I wrote. Interestingly enough, the article that you're referencing, How to Design and Live an Intentional Life, was recently published in my newsletter. It is almost 2.5 years old. So I wrote that during my sort of second burnout, and not a lot of people saw it. So I repurposed it as a newsletter. But that was coming from that place in that time. And that's why it was so easy for me to write about it.
Yeah, I think it's more relevant now than ever before, right? Now, having gone through, the pandemic and people really reevaluating their life, lots of people stop traveling, and turns out they like not traveling for half the year for work. And I know a lot of people that are just evaluating what they even want. So I think that article is just very, very timely. So what does an intentional life mean for you?
To me, it's pretty simple. It's really doing what I want, when I want, with whom I want, and doing very little of things that I don't want to do. That's it. Like my whole intention in living is to be present, to be with my family, to be with my friends, doing things that we enjoy whenever we want. And I realize that when I say that, it can sound very childlike, very fantastical. These are things I wrote in the article, but that's what I want to do. And I want to do that by doing less of things I don't want to do. And one of the greatest things about being a solopreneur, especially once you have a successful business, is you have leverage. And so you don't have to say yes to everything. You can say no to almost everything. And I love keeping my calendar cleared of things that I generally didn't like doing in the past. So that's in a nutshell what intentional life design means to me.
And how does that contribute to the business that you created for yourself, right? Did you come up with that and then intentionally design your business around that as well? Like it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, right?
Yeah, it very much is. And I wish I did it that way. What I really did was designed a business to be as profitable as possible first, without taking into consideration intentional life design or life design really at all. And then once I started to hit that second burnout phase, it was like, oh, remember this thing? Like, this is not fun. You don't want to go through that again. And so what I essentially had to do was retool my business. So after designing my business and being business first and profit first and really revenue first, right? Money first, I had to take a step back and say, if you're going to do this that way, then you run the risk of burning out again. If you simplify things and you put life and your spouse and the things that are most important to you at the forefront, we can start to retool this business and shape it around your life. And so that's what I started doing, maybe 2.5 years ago. And again, like I said in the beginning, it's an everyday struggle, right? I write about the good and the bad of what comes out of designing your life intentionally, but I'm certainly in a much better place today than I was, when I got started.
I mean, for me, after I sold my last startup in 2019, I made a list of non-negotiables before I decided what idea I was going to pursue. Like, I think ideas are a dime a dozen, but once I made that list of non-negotiables and things I must have, it eliminated like 95% of those ideas. And that was when I came across eWebinar and knew that was the thing that I wanted to pursue. So you've got these frameworks and systems for your life and your business. It all seems to be working very well, at least from a third party. What are some things that you are struggling with now, and how do you overcome them?
Yeah, I would say as I focused a lot on my spouse and my family and time and business and all those different things, I would say something always gives, right? It's always kind of like you got 5 fingers and there's 6 holes in the boat. And for me, the one that is given maybe in 2022, which I think, or 2021, which a lot of people were struggling with during the pandemic, is just really taking care of myself physically. So, 2023 is going to be a year of 2022 was all about mental health, business health, family health, but I didn't do enough things for me. And so 2023, and I don't like using like cut lines like I'm going to start on January 1st or anything like that. But, the next 12 to 18 months is really about Justin, and it's about physical, health. I have 2 back surgeries, so it's really difficult for me to be as physically active as I used to be. But I walk every day 5 or 6 miles. But I'd really like to get back into weightlifting and get back into having a really good nutrition plan and a lot of the things that I did when I was in my 20s that are much more important now that I'm in my 40s.
I mean, when I hear you speak and when I read your content, you seem to be someone that have it like all figured out. And in some ways it's overwhelming because I feel like I don't have that level of discipline to make it happen. And I'm guessing some people listening might be thinking the same thing, or maybe even thinking to themselves, I'm not good enough to have this life, or I'm not deserving of this. What would you say to someone who has these limiting beliefs?
I mean, first, I would say nobody has it all figured out. Like we think, let's take someone like myself. I write a lot about intentional life design. I write a lot about business. I write a lot about those things, and those things are going well, right? Like I'm not trying to say they aren't going well, but we're all figuring it out, right? Like there are plenty of things going poorly in my life. And just like the hot startup that you see in the news that has that sheen on it, like inside it's a mess. It's always a mess, right? And so people aren't that different than companies. And so every time that you see somebody who looks like they have it all together, they've got problems. And so I would just give people permission to realize that we're all winging it. Some of us are a little bit further ahead in the journey than others, but we're all winging it. And as systematized as I am, as many frameworks as I have for my business, stuff breaks all the time. I have terrible days, crappy mornings, bad evenings, every week. Right. And so I would say learn to look at the people and the businesses and all the things that you admire through a different lens, take off that Instagram lens and realize that, a lot of the people that you see on social media are characters.
Yeah. I mean, I've been posting on LinkedIn once a day for almost 3 months now. And what I'm finding to be interesting is how people react to that content. and how well people think we're doing. And my content isn't even about that. It's just, this is my journey. This is what I've learned. But it's this facade of like, oh, you're doing stuff. And but the thing is, I've been running this startup almost for 4 years now, and every day I feel like it's a new day. Like every day I feel like it's a new struggle, and I don't know why, but it just feels like we're constantly starting out. But 4 years is not a short time.
Yeah. And my business, which is primarily driven through social media, starts at zero every day, right? Like there's no guarantee there's no guarantee anyone's going to buy anything that I create today. So every morning I start at zero. I mean, I have some recurring revenue, like don't get me wrong, not much, but most of what I sell is one-off stuff. And so I don't know, there's two ways to look at that. One way is to look at that as like, that's scary and that's bad or that's stressful. The other way to look at it is like, it forces me to be disciplined and creative. And I like that about it. I like being on my toes every day. I like knowing that the success of my business is not guaranteed each morning that I wake up. And so I use that as maybe more as a motivator than a detractor.
So you've been a solopreneur for a few years now. Can you talk about the different phases in this journey that you kind of progress through? Like, for example, from starting to not seeing success to seeing success, like were there like pivotal points?
Yeah. I've been fortunate enough because I was able to parlay my executive role into a consulting business. That wasn't that difficult, right? Like I had created a lot of content and people were ready to sign up when I launched it. Where it became difficult is when you're a first-time solopreneur, you don't really know how to price yourself, right? So like I hit the market at a very, very low rate and got booked up right away. And then I was like, oh, I'm doing the same thing as before. This is just like work, right? It's like the same thing as working for a company. I'm just working for like 6 companies, right? And so the next sort of pivotal moment in my business was, how do I raise my rates? So not so I can make more money, so I can make the same and do less, right? And so like it became this game of niching down, picking my specialty, finding out sort of the intersection of what I enjoyed and what my customers wanted more of. And once I found that intersection, I was able to gradually raise my rates over time. As I raised my rates, new problems presented themselves. More customers in that niche, in that vertical, wanted to work with me. That means I made more money, but I was still working a lot. And the goal of trying to design this business was to have this sort of lifestyle first business, right? It wasn't always the goal, but it was becoming more and more at the forefront the more I worked. And so I had to think, okay, how do I move I went from low hourly rate to high hourly rate. Now, how do I actually like leverage traditional assets that you can build and sell at scale 24/7, 365? So the next thing that I did was move from a service only business to a service and product business. And since I can't code and I'm not an engineer and I don't know how to use, Bubble or any other no code tools, the best thing that I can do is share my knowledge. And so I started building online courses. And so as soon as I built online courses, those started selling, but then a new problem presented itself. And that new problem was I was selling online courses in a different space than where I was consulting. So I had this dual brand. And so it was like, how do you create content and attract customers when you're doing two very different things? And so my goal was to scale the product business to as big as I could possibly get it and then shut down the service business. That's what I did. I focused on building more products, getting more attention, marketing more, eventually shut down that. But then I was in a new phase where I was back down to one product. So the last phase is diversifying the ways that I make money. So I went from having an online course to 2 online courses, a private community, a newsletter with sponsorships, coaching packages, affiliate deals, a subscription email. And now I have 5 or 6 different ways that I make money. And that's where my business is at today.
So why do you do what you do? Like, is there a mission that gets you up every morning?
Yeah, it's a dual mission. I'll tell you the me part first, because I don't think enough founders are honest, right? I think they're disingenuous about why they do what they do. They should just come out and say, I did this because I want to make money, which is most commonly the true answer. So for me, number one, I want to make money. I want to live a certain lifestyle. Like I'll be very, very frank and candid with that. But I want to do it in a way where, as we've talked about, is designed to be life first. So I can spend time really with my spouse. That's what I want to do with my life. I love spending time with my wife, Jennifer. But you can't do something like that if you're not obsessed with your customers and what you're doing for them, right? So for me, I wanted to build really the first accessible and affordable digital education program, because all this knowledge is locked in these masterclass style $1,500, $1,800, $2,500 price points that not only most Americans can't afford, but nearly anyone across the world can't afford. And much like venture capitalists are figuring out in Latin America, in Africa, in India, there's a lot of really smart people out there that with the right resources and the right capital can do really important things. So what I've done is created this digital education curriculum at an affordable price where I use purchase power parity, which means if you're in India or Pakistan, you get 70% off of everything of mine. If you're in Latin America, you get 40 or 50% off. If you're in Africa, you get 60% off. And so what I want to do is encourage 1 million people to build the same type of lifestyle that I'm building, to get the tools and the products they need and the knowledge that they need to build an online reputation, to build an audience, to build a business, and to break free of whatever sort of company they work for or situation they're in. And I love empowering people to do that.
First of all, I love that. And I love how honest you are about like wanting to make money. That was actually one of my posts a couple of weeks ago about how, like, you know, I think there's so many negative connotations of money, right? Like money is the root of all evil. You're supposed to build a company because you're passionate about it, not because you love money. And I often wonder whether believing those things affects how we can or cannot embrace our desire for financial success. And I think we have to be honest about wanting financial success before we can even, I don't know if give permission to build our company is the right word, but that's kind of what I'm getting to, is just be authentic about why you're doing this. Just because you love money doesn't mean that's the only thing you love, but we're almost taught in society to not love it because it's evil or bad or that makes you greedy.
We're taught by people who have it, right? Don't want to give it up. And so to me, money is not the root of all evil, right? Money is an amplifier of who you are. And so oftentimes we think money is the root of all evil because a lot of bad people have a lot of money, right? Yeah. But every once in a while, we get to see someone really great with money, and we get to see the impact that they have on the world. And so as much as I love making money, I also love giving it away. Like, I think one of the things that's really fun that my wife and I do is every other week we go out to eat. And when we have a good server, we just leave a surprise $100 tip. We do it all the time. I love doing that. It's so cool to watch people's faces when they open the check. This upcoming Thanksgiving, I haven't figured out the logistics yet, but I'm putting it out there into the universe to see if I can make it happen. But like, I want to feed 1,000 families Thanksgiving dinner, like that can't afford it. Like, I'm going to try and do that this November. No idea how to do the logistics, no idea what I'm even going to do yet, but like made that commitment, told my wife about it, and she's like, go for it. So I love doing stuff like that. And I wish that more light would be shined on stories like that so that we were aware of some of the benefits of having money.
I mean, I think it wasn't it like Henry Ford or something that said money doesn't change someone, it unmasks them. That's one thing that I always remember.
Good quote.
So talk to me about work-life balance. What does a day in your life look like? Hey, I'd like to take a second here to talk about my own company, eWebinar, and our mission to rescue people from what I call webinar hell, to give them back their time and save them literally hundreds of hours every month through webinar automation. If your sales team is tired of doing the same demo over and over for unqualified leads or worse, prospects who don't even show up, an on-demand demo powered by eWebinar can help them get their time back so they can close more deals. If you're doing customer onboarding and training on repeat, eWebinar can help you automate those so you never have to do them live again. Customer success teams are using eWebinar to run hundreds of sessions every single month without a live host. Why don't you give our product a try and see for yourself? Visit eWebinar.com to join our own on-demand demo or to sign up for a free trial. All right, now that I've gotten that on my system, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, I mean, a day in my life is pretty standard. So I generally work anywhere. I want to be clear about this though. I have set up to work between 4 and 5 hours. Sometimes I'll work 10 hours. Other times I will work 2, right? That is the benefit of controlling my business and being the only person in my business. So generally the way that I think about my time is every Monday, I've got an hour to do my newsletter. I've got an hour to create content, and I've got an hour to write a book that I'm writing. Every Tuesday, hour for content, hour for repurposing, hour for the book. Wednesday, content, ideas, book. Thursday, content, thread, book. Like it's generally really around just creation of content. And outside of the creation of content, by the way, these are all tactical things. Like every once in a while, it's time to build a new course or, update my website or something like that, where I might spend 3 or 4 hours doing those things. Or if I want to build a course, I might spend 90 hours over 30 days, building something like that. So there are days when I work much less and days where I work much more. But ultimately, I've learned not to create false urgency, meaning if I build a course next month or the following month, it doesn't matter. I don't want to make a decision and create urgency when there is none and steal time away from my family, my friends, my spouse. So I try and be patient and thoughtful about how many hours in the day I put in. That's the answer.
I want to switch gears to talk about your business because I really want listeners here to take advantage of what you've created, as I have. I'm a student of your LinkedIn course, and I've been, as I mentioned, posting daily for almost 3 months now. Your core offerings are built around content creation, but your experience has been in sales. And as a salesperson myself, I know that salespeople don't write content like you. And not only do you write some of the best content on the internet, you've built a multi-million-dollar business out of it. Where did you learn how to write like that?
By writing. Like, it's really interesting. Lots of people want to learn to write. And so a lot of people they do something that I call procrastination dressed up as action, which means, hey, what's your favorite copywriting book? Oh, I like War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. I like Cashvertising. I like whatever, right? Ogilvy on advertising. Oh, great. I just picked up all 3 of those. You don't need to pick up all 3. Just pick up one and then get started. And I think the easiest way to learn how to write is to write every single day. And I have not taken a day off writing in 3.5 years. So I write every single day. Even if I'm on vacation, I'm writing at some point in time. And so one of the things I do well, and there aren't many, but one of the things I do well is I'm autodidactic. So like I like to teach myself. I don't like to learn from other people's advice all that often. I do sometimes when someone has, I think, really good advice. But like if I want to learn to write, I'm not going to call up a writer or no, I'm just going to go start writing and figure it out. And I figured out over the course of 3 years, just like what makes a good piece of content. Like social media writing is different than traditional writing. And traditional writers are often poor social media writers and vice versa. So I studied the art of social media writing by writing on social media 2 times a day, every day for 3.5 years. So I've produced probably 2,500 pieces of unique content over that course of that time.
Can you talk about the 2 courses that you have right now and how it can help other entrepreneurs?
Sure. My sort of core course that I started with is called The Operating System. It was called the LinkedIn Operating System, but LinkedIn didn't like that. So it's now called the Operating System, but I'll call it the LinkedIn Operating System on this podcast. That is essentially how I leverage LinkedIn to grow and make money on the platform. That is my core platform, always has been. I'm approaching 300,000 followers there. It's a really underrated channel. I think a lot of people are figuring that out, starting to get much more crowded.
Yeah.
But by using that course, you can learn to grow an audience and you can learn to monetize an audience. It is the number 1 course, I think, on the planet for LinkedIn. It's got 7,000 students. My other offering is called the Content Operating System. And the Content Operating System is really about producing a significant number of high quality pieces of content at scale, quickly and efficiently. So it's really a 9 or 10 step system that you can use to produce a long form piece of content like a newsletter, to produce 10 to 15 pieces of social media content, to produce promotional content, and do that all by walking through a system. The worst thing that a writer can do on social media is to wake up each morning and stare at a blank piece of paper. It's the worst. And what do I write today? And using the system that I created, you never fail to produce. And when you produce in big batches.
I mean, I just love that you've productized community engagement through content creation, but it's really community engagement, which is what everybody, including me, is trying to figure out. And yeah, like I didn't log into LinkedIn for years. And earlier this year, in 2022, I logged in and I was like, what is this? Because I was no longer going into Facebook or anything like that. And it was just a whole different world of, people I had accepted connections from that I didn't really know about, but were posting really interesting content. And it felt like it was obviously no longer the resume website that I knew about. And that's actually when I started digging in. And I've been in sales for 20 years. The reason I found you was because I realized the way I used to sell, mostly enterprise software, was no longer working. People have never hated being sold to more than they do today. And I'm convinced that the future of sales is community driven. And if you want to sell anything, you have to have your own community and your own voice. And that's why I came across your content, started reading all your posts, kind of dissecting it, took your course, and started to figure this out for myself. So I wanted to personally embrace this trend and not get left behind. And content has become such a massive part of our lives, right? We're constantly consuming it in different mediums, in different forms. How do you see content fitting into our lives today, particularly in business?
Yeah, I mean, it fits into different people's lives in different ways. I want to touch on something that you said that I think is really important before we kind of dive into that question, which is you said, I think business will be community led. And first of all, I agree with you. But second of all, I think that people misinterpret what it means to run a community. So, for example, if I mention community in my content, people generally respond this way. What should I use for my community? Slack, Discord, Circle, Facebook groups? That is not tools are not community, right? Where people congregate, like a tool does not make a community. I could argue that because I show up at 7:15 a.m. Central Standard Time every morning on LinkedIn and engage with my audience for an hour, and then show up again at 12:02 p.m. and engage with my audience for a few minutes, I could argue that that is a community. We meet at the same place and the same time every single day. That's a community, right? And so I think it's really important for people not to get caught up in what program, what software, what tech, and start thinking about how do I interact with folks on a regular basis, right? To answer the question that you asked, like where does content fit in? I think right now we're in this beginning wave of this creator-led movement where so many people are trying to be creators. We're seeing generally three types of creators, in my opinion. By the way, there's probably many more, but let's just bucket them into these three types. The first type is someone who's adding a tremendous amount of value and is being rewarded for that value with followers, attention, website visits, business, so on and so forth. I hope that I'm someone like that. That's where I'm trying to get to. The second person is the person who is copying the folks who are adding the value. And the third type and they're just essentially copycats. And the third group is people who can't figure out how to add value right now. And they're not adding any value and they're not being rewarded in any way. And I think it's going to be really critical over today. The best and the copycats still make it. I think over time, only the best will make it. I think the copycats will start to go away. I think people will see through that. They'll see that it's disingenuous. The people who never can get attention will quit and they will be consumers, which is thankfully, part of the ecosystem. And I think those folks who can stand out with a unique voice, unique perspective, a unique take on sometimes not a unique problem will rise to the top. And I think although I mentioned community isn't Slack or Discord or Facebook groups or things like that, I do believe that the person who can, for lack of a better description, wrangle their community members into a place where they're deepening relationships, I think the deepest relationships in the end will win.
Yeah, I love that. And I love how easy it is to get started. And I think That's the vibe you're going for, right? By systemizing what your knowledge and putting it out in the world. I mean, you still have to put in the work, but you've completely systematized the content creation process, which is, so someone like me who's never embarked on something like this, is just awesome. Why do you think having a system for content creation is so important?
It's a function of being forced, right? So I'm a one-person show. By the way, it's always funny. People are like, really, how many employees do you have? None. Zero. I have a virtual assistant, no, and all she does is handle customer service inquiries. She doesn't help with content, nothing, right? So I'm forced. I have to have a system. And because if I didn't, like, I would wake up each morning and say, what do I do today? And so because I am the only person behind my business, it's really critical that each morning that I wake up, I know exactly what I'm doing to move the business forward. And for a long time, I operated without systems. But as I started to build this business more successfully, the thing that I thought about was, how do I take all the stuff that I learned being a chief revenue officer for 5 years and growing a really big SaaS company? How do I bring that into my one-person business? And so I started to install things every time I saw friction in my process. So like, you get up, you go to do something and you're like, oh, wait a minute. How do I do this next thing? Or what? Oh, there's a problem here. I forgot to do X. It's like, okay, that goes in the system, right? You got to put that in the system, because every time you hit friction, there's an opportunity for you to fail. And I don't care who the person is, nobody's disciplined enough to never fail. And so systems are there when discipline fails. And that's why systems, especially for someone who's a one-person business, are so important.
Yeah. And for anyone listening, if you want to take content creation and community building seriously, it is a lot of work, but I can assure you it's worth it. It's not just from an audience building perspective. It also just keeps your brain moving. And for me, that's the best part. It forces you to think about your expertise and experiences that you may have just taken for granted. You know, you've completely normalized these things. And it's just such a great feeling when you put something out there and people react positively to it. Something that you found was maybe just normal because you've just been doing this for the past 10 years. For me, like, that's been like, there's like rewarding little moments when like I do come up with a post that is meaningful. So what's your best advice for someone listening to this who's now thinking, okay, I got it. I'm sick of this hamster wheel as well. I'm ready to start taking control of my life and designing the life I want to live, right? What are the first steps they should take to start navigating that journey to self-employment?
I think it's really important that, like, people are always like, when should I jump into self-employment? And the answer is, I don't know, right? Like, I would hate to give someone advice only to find out that the luck or privilege that I have on my side isn't being granted to them, and give someone really bad advice, right? So I don't think there's a right time to jump, but there is a decent order in which to do things. And I think the very first thing to do is to get some attention. And I use that word attention quite frequently. That's what it is, right? We're all adults vying for attention on social media. Like, let's be clear about what it is. So to go out and get some attention, but it can't just be any attention. It has to be specific. And I think that when people start posting on LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram, whatever, they like share all the things in their head. And it's like this gobbledygook mess of content. Instead, decide what problem you solve. Like, who do you help, right? Like, what do you help them do? But you can't solve an obvious problem with an obvious solution. Like, that's why every sales consultant, sales coach, they all sound the same, right? And so when you all sound the same, it's a race to the bottom on price. So the thing that you have to do is be different. You have to have a non-obvious approach to a very obvious problem. So you got to figure out what that is. And if you have a great solution, some non-obvious solution to a very obvious problem that people have, you need to get attention for that. And the best way to get attention for that is not to write long-winded stories, or not to write sappy things, or try and be emotional. Like, yeah, that gets a lot of impressions, but it's not really going to build a business. What you need to do is show people that they can trust in your expertise. And so the easiest way that you can do that is share helpful stuff. I want to give you an example of somebody who's doing this really well and who I would follow and watch what he's doing. His name is Jake Ward. He started on LinkedIn maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. And he's a search engine optimizer, right? He's an SEO. And as soon as he started on LinkedIn, he went out and he started sharing case studies, white papers. Here's the thing we tried. Here's 6 steps we did to boost this person's, organic reach on this blog post. Here's how we opened up a new revenue channel. Like, everything that he produces is high quality, data-backed stories and studies that you can read and say, this guy knows his stuff. This guy absolutely has figured out how to turn blogs into six-figure revenue channels through search engine optimization. He's so good at it that this morning I reached out to him and said, hey man, 2023, I want to work on SEO. Like, should we just jump on a phone call? I'll do a discovery. Like, do you work with companies like me? Will you help me? Right? He did that in 5 weeks. Like 5 weeks. It's 25 posts. He showed his expertise enough to get me in there. And I was like, this is a great example of how you start. Instead of sharing, food and travel and like, just get to the stuff, right? And so do that, but also design your profile in a way that is relevant and related to the content that you share. So if you share stuff about search engine optimization every single day or how to turn blogs into six-figure revenue channels, when I go to your profile, is it clear? Is it cohesive? Does it match up with your content? Does it tell me how to take next steps? Is it frictionless or friction-filled? There are so many people, Melissa, when I read their content, I'm interested in their service. I go to their profile. I can't actually figure out how to buy it. That's a terrible problem, right? And so like those are just some maybe I think little tactical things that I might recommend in the beginning.
So, Justin, where is this all going for you? Like, what does success mean for you right now?
I am currently sort of working through Maslow's hierarchy, right? Like my business is performing well. I'm in a very good situation. And when those things happen, what's left is sort of purpose, right? And what I've come to realize is that I get a lot of joy out of figuring out new things. So to give you an example, I worked from being the sales guy making cold calls back in 2003 to chief revenue officer by 2014. So it was an 11-year journey to reach what is essentially the pinnacle of sales leadership, right? Highest role you could really take in sales leadership. And when I did it, for lack of a better description, not the right word, but like burn the boats, started a brand new career as a creator, went from somebody with no followers. Now I've got 500,000 followers across 2 platforms. Like I'm feeling as though that is moving towards reaching some sort of apex or pinnacle. And I know that in 2 or 3 years, I'll probably just disappear from social media and do something else, right? Like I'll do something that's a new challenge. And I think the next challenge that I want to do is I want to do something locally. My wife and I are in the process of moving from Nashville to upstate New York. And I'd love to actually build in a real community, like a community of people not on the internet. So 3 years from now, you might see me wave goodbye and start a brewery.
Yeah, that's cool. So not a lot of people know this, but 7 years ago, I moved to New York for my previous startup. And the first thing I did was join a couple founders to found a co-living space. So that was one side project that I did. And that really just made my entire life in New York. Like everybody I met in New York through those years was through this house. So Justin, final question. What are some final words of wisdom that you want to leave with our listeners today, which are bootstrap founders who are focusing on driving growth and profitability?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say, if anything, like action solves most problems, and it has to be appropriate action. So I see so many people making really big bets, taking really big swings. And as a bootstrap founder, I don't like that approach. Like I like to take small bets, small swings, small experiments. I like to try several different things at one time and really push away those things that don't work and double down on those things that do. I know that's really cliche advice, but so many people forget to actually take it. And so I'm here just repeating that because I think if I hadn't tried community or I hadn't built a product or I hadn't, thrown up a landing page or said, hey, screw it, I'm going to start a newsletter, like all those things, I didn't know how long those were going to last or if they were going to be good ideas, but they all had very high upside, very low downside. And some of them worked and some of them didn't. But the ones that you see me continuing to do are the ones that worked.
Well, thanks again for being on the show. How can people connect with you?
They can go to my website. It is justinwelsh.me. It's Justin Welsh, WELSH.me.
Well, thanks so much. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to ProfitLed and be notified of new episodes. Head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of this episode as well. And Justin, thanks again for your time.
Thanks for listening to ProfitLed. If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you will subscribe to the ProfitLed podcast and head over to our website, profitled.fm, to see the show notes of every episode. You can also join our mailing list to be notified of new episodes or when we have interesting products and resources to share. We promise to only share things you'll actually care about. Thanks again for listening. Bye now.